All right, now for exercise 2, in order to understand the use of vector tools in digital imaging, which is very different than raster. This is a raster image that's based on pixels, and if I zoom in enough, I'll see all the individual pixels. But the way this image is really effective is just in its use of shapes. And so I want to use shape tools that are clean and infinitely scalable to match this up. So this is what I'm going to do. First, I want to make a copy of the background layer, and I do that by clicking on the background and then hitting Command J to duplicate it. And now I'm going to alter the image. I'm going to alter this copy a little bit, all while keeping the background layer safe and untouched. So to alter it, I'm going to go to Filter, and I'm going to go to Blur, and then Gaussian Blur. And what this will do is it will smush together those pixels, like you're looking at it through water. And I want to blur it to the point where I don't really see them as pixels anymore, I see them as shapes. So maybe something like that. And that helps me identify the dominant colors, the dominant shapes, and I'm looking at the positive shapes within these figures here and the negative shapes, the space around. Now that can help me. That's not a vector tool yet, but that can help me simplify all this detail. I don't need all of the detail. I need to get the main shapes that are shown here. And I want to start with kind of the biggest shapes. So now on top of this background copy, I'm going to go down into our vector tools in Photoshop. And the one I'm going to use the most is the shape tool. So if you hold it down, it will open the drawer. You will see a lot of those basic shapes, a rectangle, an ellipse, a polygon, and then the custom shape tool. Let's start with just the ellipse tool. So I know that the cat has kind of a circular head shape, and that's a pretty big one. So I'm going to click and drag and make an oval. If I want it to be a perfect circle, I hold down Shift, and it will lock it into a perfect circle. And it's okay if I don't place it exactly, because then once I have it, I can use the Move tool and move it in place. Now when you create a shape, this creates a new layer that's a vector layer. And you can see a little vector box in the corner of the layer. And this is called Ellipse 1 because I use the Ellipse shape tool. And then you'll get the properties of that shape. And so the first property you'll want to turn off probably is the outline. So you click on the outline options here, the stroke options, and you just click on the no bar. And that will take care of all of those. Next, the color. So the color I use, obviously it's not going to be this bright green. I want it to be an orange that kind of fits. So I can pick a color from here, or this is my favorite way of doing it. If I click on the color selector, then I can actually pick a color directly from the image. So if I want it to be the red of that shoulder pad, for instance, I can match that exactly. There's a shorthand for that as well. If you just double click on that vector layer icon, it will take you right to that color selector. So you can change these colors dynamically as you go. So that's my first shape. Now the other thing I'm going to do is make a new layer between my first shape layer and my out of focus background copy. And I'm going to fill this with white. Okay. And that's going to, I'm going to toggle that on and off just to see what my shapes alone are telling me. But you know what? Mine has a simple background. Not all of yours will. But mine is a simple background with a color. So instead of filling it with white, I want to fill it with that color. So I'm going to turn it on. But before I turn it on, I'm going to select this color using the dropper tool. So it's in my foreground color hold. Then I turn it on and I'm going to say Edit Fill with my foreground color. And there I go. So I've just gotten started. Now I go to my first shape and I'm going to do a new shape. And this time I want to do another ellipse. I want to do maybe the big torso of the cat. Use the move tool. Remember, it will remember my last settings, and I put it there. Maybe I want the same color, that's fine. Or maybe I want it to go lighter. I can double click and I can pick one of these other oranges. Now what if I want that circle on top of this? Well, I just click and move down that layer. Layers are just like pieces of paper stacked on top of each other. And now, so far, that's what I have. You might find it helpful, and I'll do this sometimes, to also open up your reference just by double-clicking it in Preview and just keeping that in the corner of your screen. So at any time, and then I'm going to shrink my Photoshop window a little bit so that I can always see what shapes I'm going for in the background there. And now let's build up some of these other shapes, like her shirt. Now her shirt is interesting. It's a more complicated shape than one of these, but I'm going to use the rounded rectangle shape. And just put it in, match its color. And now this is where you're going to learn something very useful. So, just like I was able to transform my cartoon jumble reference as a raster, you can use the same tools within Photoshop to transform, reshape your vector objects. So I hit Command T, and that allows me to shrink and scale, but I can also rotate. And then if I use the right-click button inside the transform box, I can do these really cool options, like warp, which is one of my all-time favorites. Gives you a little chicken wire grid, and you're able to push and pull the shape like it's made of clay into whatever shape you want. And we're not going for exact matches here. I don't want you to waste a ton of time trying to make everything match. But we're going for something that has the qualities of the shape that you want. And then you hit return. And now that's still a vector shape. You see it there. But you see how it much better matches that gesture. Want to see how my shapes are doing so far? So far, so good. These little red shapes. Let's do ellipses for those. Let's get their color right. And then the move tool. So you're going a lot between the move tool, transforming, moving shapes around. Now here I have another shape that's similar, and instead of drawing a new red circle, I could just duplicate with Command J that last one I did, and then use the move tool to move that duplicate over, and then transform it and make it what I want. So you'll have a lot of flexibility in how you use these tools. We're just trying to get across the basic composition using only flat vector shapes. Now her face and neck and skin, that's a really complicated, like, droopy shape. So this might be where I use the custom shape tool. And the custom shape tool has a bunch of pre-programmed shapes into it that are vectors. My favorite to use is this one, the kind of curvy star, and I'll show you why. So if I use that custom shape tool and I put it in, and then let's match a skin color, and then I transform it, rotate it, scale it, nip and tuck, especially if I use right click and then the warp tool. This gives me enough flexibility to get some of these really strange shapes. Or a simplification of them, which is all I need. And remember, it's like stacking different shapes on top of each other. So I don't need to worry about what the shape's doing under here, because that's going to be underneath that shirt shape. Okay, so let's say I like it like that. I'm going to pull at the top of it a little bit more using the warp tool. So using the custom shape vector tool and then warp to adjust it, you can get almost anything you can imagine. And then of course you can always add multiple shapes together. And then your move tool to kind of move it into place and then put it in the right order. So I want this behind those two. Let's see how I'm doing. Still a long ways to go. But you can see by looking at the blurry, it's a lot easier to find those shapes than looking at just the detailed. All right. So it looks like I need some of these pants. The darker shapes, when you squint and they're darker than everything else, it's important to pay attention to that. And so for that, I might use some different rectangles. And then how do I turn those into wedges? Well, let's get them the right color first. I use the transform tools again, Command T, but this time I'm going to use distort. And distort allows you to just tug at the edges, and you can make them into your own wedges or triangles. I don't use the polygon tool too much, but that's what you would use to make triangles. You would just make a three-sided polygon. All right, and we work from there. Whoops. So now I want the other leg. So instead of trying to make that one shape, I just overlap two. And I can do that by just drawing another rectangle. It should remember all my settings. And so those colors should match perfectly, and then transform. But I can also duplicate the original and then mess with that. But here, Command T, right click, distort. The great thing about using that blur filter to start with is it keeps me from focusing on all of the different details of the belt and the sword and the gun. Those really aren't impacting the overall shapes of the composition. The ear here, I have a triangle. Let me just show you how the triangle works. You use the polygon tool, and then up here you say how many sides you want. So I'm going to use 3 sides. Draw my triangle. Pick the color. And then, of course, use Command T and distort. To get it what you want it to be. All right, now you're going to come to the point like I have, where your shapes are starting to block the details you need to be able to see. So when that happens, I take my background copy, which is blurry, and I'm going to move it up above everything. And I'm going to turn it to multiply. Now, the problem with that is it makes everything darker because I'm looking through everything, but it helps me see if there are major shapes I'm leaving out. And there are a few, on, especially on the tiger's face. So I can turn that off for a minute, and then I'm just going to concentrate on the tiger's face, and I can turn off the circle, and then on top of it start building some of these shapes. And that's what I'll pick up with the next demo.